Hey there, nerds, and welcome back to Don't Die Dumb, the show where we ponder the big questions, the existential anxieties, and the ethical dilemmas that keep us up at night, or, at least should. Because honestly, what's the point of having a brain if we're not going to use it to grapple with the really messy, complicated stuff? Today, we're talking ethics, and not just your everyday, should I steal this candy bar? Kind of ethics. We're talking about the kind of ethical dilemmas that could reshape our future, the kind that involve artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and the very fate of our planet. Because the future isn't just some preordained destiny, it's a tapestry woven with the threads of our choices. And those choices? They're often fraught with ethical complexities. We're not just passively observing the future unfold, we're actively creating it. And with great power, as Uncle Ben told Peter Parker, comes great responsibility. But unlike Peter Parker, we don't have spidey sense to guide us, just our own messy, flawed human judgment. So buckle up, because we're about to embark on a journey through the ethical minefield of the 21st century. Think of ethics as a kind of moral GPS, trying to navigate us through a world with constantly shifting landscapes and unexpected detours. It's not always easy, and sometimes the map is outdated or the signal is weak. But we have to keep trying, because the alternative is just blindly stumbling through the darkness, hoping we don't fall off a cliff. And let's be honest, the cliffs are getting higher and the darkness is getting deeper. So in this video, we're going to examine 7 key ethical dilemmas, 7 crossroads where we have to decide which path to take. We'll explore the arguments on both sides, wrestle with the nuances, and hopefully come away with a better understanding of the challenges we face. Because if we're going to build a better future, we need to be equipped to ask the hard questions, and more importantly, to listen to the answers, even when they make us uncomfortable. Our first ethical dilemma is one we're all increasingly familiar with: the rise of artificial intelligence, or AI. From self-driving cars to algorithms that curate our news feeds, AI is already shaping our lives in profound ways. And its influence is only going to grow. We're talking about machines that can learn, adapt, and even make decisions, sometimes better and faster than humans can, which, let's be honest, is kind of terrifying. I mean, we've been telling stories about intelligent machines for centuries, from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to HAL 9000 in 2001, A Space Odyssey. And those stories often explore the very anxieties we're facing today. What happens when our creations become smarter than their creators? What happens when we give machines the power to make decisions that affect human lives? These aren't just hypothetical questions anymore. Think about self-driving cars. They have the potential to make our roads safer, reduce traffic congestion, and even revolutionize transportation. But what happens when a self-driving car has to choose between the life of its passenger and the life of a pedestrian? Who programs that decision, and on what ethical basis? Is it a simple calculation of minimizing harm, or are there other factors at play? These are the kinds of questions we need to be asking. And it's not just about life or death scenarios. AI algorithms are already used in everything from hiring processes to loan applications, and these algorithms can perpetuate and even amplify existing biases. So we have to ask ourselves, are we building a future where machines reinforce inequality, or are we using this technology to create a more just and equitable world? The answer, as with most ethical dilemmas, is complicated. Our next ethical dilemma takes us into the realm of biology, specifically genetic engineering. Thanks to technologies like CRISPR, we now have the ability to edit genes with unprecedented precision. We can literally rewrite the code of life, potentially curing genetic diseases, enhancing human traits, and even creating entirely new organisms. It's like something out of a science fiction novel, but it's happening right now. And, as with any powerful technology, it raises a whole host of ethical questions. Is it right to alter the genetic makeup of future generations? Should we be playing God, tinkering with the very building blocks of life? Where do we draw the line between therapy and enhancement? These are questions that have been debated for decades, but the advent of CRISPR has made them much more urgent and much more real. Consider the possibility of eliminating genetic diseases like cystic fibrosis or Huntington's disease. This is a truly remarkable prospect, offering hope and relief to millions of people who suffer from these debilitating conditions. It's hard to argue against the ethical imperative to alleviate suffering, especially when we have the tools to do so. But where does that leave us in terms of enhancing human traits? What about using gene editing to make people taller, stronger, or more intelligent? Is that ethically permissible? And what are the potential societal consequences of such interventions? Could we end up creating a genetic underclass, further exacerbating existing inequalities? These are questions that deserve careful consideration. So, let's talk about climate change. Not just the science, which, let's be clear, is overwhelmingly conclusive, but the ethical morass it creates. Because the real thorny issue isn't whether climate change is happening, it's who bears the responsibility for fixing it. And, spoiler alert, it's complicated. Like trying to assemble IKEA furniture while blindfolded complicated. We're talking about a planet-sized problem with a history rooted in industrialization. Developed nations, with their factories and fossil fuel consumption, have historically been the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. Think of it as a giant, atmospheric debt that's been accumulating for centuries. But now, developing nations are striving for economic growth, often through the same industrial processes that created the problem in the first place. It's a classic catch-22. And then there's the kicker, the people who will experience the most severe consequences of climate change. Rising sea levels, extreme weather events, food shortages, are the ones who haven't even been born yet. We're talking about future generations inheriting a planet significantly altered by choices made long before their time. It's like leaving a really messy room for your future roommate, except the mess is, existential. So, how do we weigh the needs of the present against the well-being of the future? How do we allocate the responsibility for cleaning up this mess? Do we expect developing nations to sacrifice economic growth for a problem they didn't primarily create? These are the ethical dilemmas at the heart of climate change, and they're not easy to answer. In fact, they might be some of the most difficult questions humanity has ever faced. We live in a world where our digital footprints are practically permanent. Every click, every search, every online interaction leaves a trace. And that data, our data, is being collected and analyzed by governments and corporations on a scale that would have been unimaginable just a few decades ago. It's like living in a digital library where every book you've ever looked at is meticulously cataloged. On the one hand, this data collection can be used to enhance security. It can help track criminals, prevent terrorist attacks, and even predict future crimes. In a world facing increasing threats, this kind of surveillance can feel like a necessary evil, a trade-off we're willing to make for safety. It's like having a really watchful security guard, even though they might be a little too nosy. But on the other hand, this level of surveillance raises serious concerns about privacy. Where do we draw the line between protecting national security and protecting individual freedoms? Is it ethical for governments to monitor our online activity without our knowledge or consent? It's like having that same security guard read your diary. And then there's the corporate side of things. Companies collect our data to personalize ads, recommend products, and even predict our behavior. While this can lead to a more convenient and tailored online experience, it also means that our personal information is being commodified and traded. It's like living in a world where your thoughts and preferences are constantly being auctioned off to the highest bidder. Let's talk about money. Not just the kind you find in your wallet, but the kind that shapes global power dynamics, influences political decisions, and determines access to resources. We're talking about wealth, and specifically, the increasingly unequal distribution of it. The gap between the ultra-rich and the rest of us is widening, creating a chasm that threatens to swallow entire communities and even nations. The richest 1% of the global population holds a staggering amount of wealth, while billions of people struggle to meet their basic needs. We're talking about a world where a small handful of individuals possess more resources than entire countries. It's like a game of Monopoly, where one player has all the properties and everyone else is just trying to avoid bankruptcy. And this isn't just an economic issue, it's an ethical one. Is it morally justifiable for such a small percentage of the population to control such a vast amount of wealth while so many others lack access to basic necessities like food, clean water, healthcare, and education? It's like having a banquet where a few people feast on gourmet meals while others starve outside the gates. The ethical dilemma here revolves around the concept of fairness. Do the ultra-wealthy have a moral obligation to redistribute their wealth? Do they have a responsibility to contribute to the well-being of those less fortunate? These are questions that have been debated for centuries, and they're questions that are becoming increasingly urgent in our era of extreme inequality. So, freedom of speech. It's this cornerstone of, well, pretty much any society that values individual liberty, right? We like to think we can say what we want, when we want. But what happens when what we want starts to infringe on the rights and well-being of others? That's where things get complicated, nuanced, and frankly, kind of messy. Because where exactly is that line between protected speech and harmful speech? It's a question that philosophers, legal scholars, and, let's be honest, Twitter users have been grappling with for centuries. And it's not getting any easier in our increasingly interconnected world. Think about it. A single tweet can go viral and reach millions in seconds, potentially inciting violence or spreading misinformation. This is not your town square soapbox anymore, people. The scale and speed of communication have changed the game entirely, and the stakes? They're incredibly high. We're talking about the potential for real-world harm, both to individuals and to society as a whole. Think cyberbullying, hate speech, doxing. These aren't just abstract concepts, they have devastating consequences. So how do we balance the fundamental right to express oneself with the equally important need to protect vulnerable groups from targeted harassment and abuse? It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. Every twist and turn has unintended consequences, and there's no easy algorithm for getting it right. We're constantly trying to find that equilibrium, that sweet spot where free expression thrives without turning into a weapon. And honestly, it's a moving target. What was considered acceptable speech even a few decades ago might be completely unacceptable today, and vice versa. Cultural norms shift, societal values evolve, and the very definition of harmful changes along with them. So, we're in this constant state of negotiation, of redefining the boundaries of acceptable discourse, which, let's be real, is exhausting. But also, kind of essential to a functioning democracy, right? Because if we can't even agree on what we can and can't say, how can we possibly hope to address the bigger issues facing our world? The internet has amplified this whole dilemma by, a million? It's like giving everyone a megaphone and then being surprised when things get loud and messy. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. More voices, more perspectives. That's the ideal, right? But it also means more potential for conflict, for the spread of harmful ideologies, for the erosion of trust in institutions and information. So, the question becomes, how do we curate this digital public square? Do we impose stricter regulations, risking censorship and limiting free expression? Or do we embrace a more laissez-faire approach, accepting the chaos and hoping for the best? Neither option is particularly appealing, and that's why this dilemma is so thorny. So, human rights. The idea that all humans, regardless of where they live, what they believe, or who they love, are entitled to certain fundamental rights and freedoms. It seems pretty straightforward, right? Like, everyone deserves basic dignity, respect, and the opportunity to live a life free from fear and oppression. We have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, this landmark document that outlines these fundamental principles. But in practice, things get complicated. Sovereignty, national interests, economic pressures, these often clash with the ideals of universal human rights. And then there's the question of enforcement. Human rights are violated, a lot. Genocide, political repression, forced labor, human trafficking, these are the lived realities of millions. And while we might condemn these atrocities from afar, the question remains, what are we willing to do about them? So, there you have it. 7 of the biggest ethical dilemmas shaping our future. From artificial intelligence and genetic engineering to climate change and human rights, these are complex, multifaceted issues with no easy answers. We've talked about the challenges of balancing freedom of speech with the need to protect vulnerable groups from harm. We've explored the complexities of global inequality and the ethical dilemmas surrounding wealth distribution. And we've delved into the thorny issue of human rights in a globalized world, grappling with the question of who's responsible for upholding these fundamental rights and how we can hold powerful actors accountable. These aren't just abstract philosophical debates. They are real-world issues with profound implications for our future. They require us to think critically, to engage in thoughtful dialogue, and to make difficult choices. There's no single right answer to any of these dilemmas. What might seem like a clear-cut solution in one context could have unintended consequences in another. And that's what makes these issues so fascinating, so challenging, and so vitally important. They demand that we grapple with competing values, conflicting interests, and the inherent uncertainties of the future. They force us to confront our own biases, our own assumptions, and our own complicity in perpetuating injustice. And ultimately, they require us to work together, across borders and across ideologies, to find solutions that benefit all of humanity. So, what do you think? How do we balance privacy and security in the digital age? Is it ethical to alter human genes? Should wealthy nations bear a greater responsibility for addressing climate change? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video thought-provoking, give us a like and hit that subscribe button for more fascinating discussions on the biggest challenges facing our world today. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and don't die dumb.